It is 10th of March 1965. You're back in your office after lunch and you've been at work, busy, typing on the typewriter, clack, 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 for the last hour. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, a loud noise. Boom! It reverberates. Everything's shocking. Everyone looks around. Everyone looks shocked. And what happened? A bomb went off. A bomb went off in Singapore. A bomb went off in Orchard Road. On the morning of 10th of March 1965 at around 11 a.m., two Indonesian Marine commandos, disguised as civilians, proceeded to this building here, which is McDonald's house. And in between that time and the time they left, they have planted, each of them, a bundle of explosives on the steps of the mezzanine floor near the lift area. So they lit the fuse and then left the building around 3 p.m. and boarded a bus. During those time, the main occupant of the ground floor were the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. And during those times, banks normally close their doors early at 3 p.m. so that they can start closing their accounts. And during that time is also the busiest time and most of the employees were there. So at that time, on the ground floor, there were 150 employees. And 7 minutes after they closed the doors, the explosion occurred. So the bomb, which exploded at 3:07 p.m., also ripped off a lift door, while the inner walls of the mezzanine floor took the full force of the blast. And the blast was so powerful that windows within 100 yards were shattered, and the explosion damaged almost every car parked outside the building. Later examination of the building showed that around 20 to 25 pounds or 9 to 11 kg of nitroglycerin explosives were used for the bombing. The explosion claimed the lives of 3 people and injured at least 33 others. The 3 people were 2 employees of the bank, Elizabeth Chu, age 36, a secretary, and Juliet Goh, 23, a clerk. The third victim was a Malay man named Muhammad Yassin, age 45, a driver, who slipped into a coma after the blast and later died. 3 days later, after the explosion, 2 men were rescued from the sea by Singapore, by a bumboat who saw them clinging to a plank. At that time, these 2 men were not wearing any military uniforms or had any identification papers. But later, these 2 men were taken on board a marine police boat and subsequently interrogated by the police. It was found out that these 2 men were 2 Indonesian Marine commandos, and they were responsible for the McDonald's house bombing. And they were just trying to escape using a plank by sea back to Indonesia. McDonald's house, an important location during the confrontasi situation in Singapore. Then, on the 20th of October 1965, the 2 men were convicted by the High Court of Singapore for the murder of 3 civilians resulting from the McDonald's house bombing and were sentenced to death. Their appeals to the Federal Court of Malaysia were dismissed on 5th October 1966, and both men were hanged on the 17th of October 1968. So, why did two Indonesian Marine commandos bomb a building in Singapore? That's a bit strange, isn't it? Well, the bombing was carried out as part of Indonesia's confrontation with Malaysia, and Singapore was part of Malaysia during that time. And this time, or this confrontation, is also known as confrontasi. So the Indonesian confrontation period was between the period of 1963 to 1966, which saw Indonesia using military force to engage in acts of sabotage and terrorism against the states that comprise the Federation of Malaysia, namely Malaya, Singapore, and the former British territories of North Borneo, which is Sabah and Sarawak. So the bombing in Singapore was an example of this policy of intimidation, which was championed by the then President Sukarno because he opposed the formation of Malaysia as a country. And so because of the execution of these two Indonesian Marine commandos, there was lots of public anger in Jakarta. So a band of 40 students sacked the Singapore embassy in Indonesia and the residences of Singapore diplomats there. But that's not the end. There were another two Indonesians on death row in Singapore for crimes committed during confrontasi. And these two men were charged for unlawfully carrying 43 pounds of explosives at Tanjong Rhu and Katong Park on the 14th of April 1965. Two demolition experts and two police officers were injured during the defusing of the bombs. And following the trial, the two men were sentenced to death. However, their death sentence were remitted following the pleas by the Indonesian government, and both of them were sent back to Indonesia in April 1967. This case was handled differently, or had a different outcome, because the bombs planted did not kill anyone, unlike the McDonald's house bombing, which killed 3 people. And along Orchard Road, this unassuming road, this peaceful road, there were more bombings, but this happened much later, in 1985. And also at this building, this unassuming building that most people would have walked past and doesn't know it exists, but this building were witness to explosions too along Orchard Road. On 17th of March 1985, at around 11:30 p.m. at night, the only people around in the building were the security guard. An explosion occurred. Boom! But luckily, no one was injured in the incident. It was believed that less than 500 grams of plastic explosive was planted in a 25 centimeter drain running parallel to the side wall of the building. And because this wall and a row of 2-story shop houses next to Faber House, the impact of the blast was directed upwards and not sideways. So the explosion left a hole in the drain and knocked the roof tiles off the adjacent building. And at Faber House, the glass doors on the ground floor and the glass windows from the 1st to the 6th story were shattered. And parts of the black marble wall was blown off. After the bomb went off, no one claimed responsibility for the explosion. But it was suspected that it could be for two reasons, because in the building there were two embassies or two diplomatic missions in the building. There was the Israeli embassy there and also the Canadian High Commission. But both of them reported that they did not receive any bomb threats. So no one claimed responsibility for this bombing until 1991, when a Palestinian guerrilla was captured and he confessed to the Israeli army that he was behind the bombing and the explosion. His target was actually the Israeli embassy. Then, again, on the 21st December 1986, 1 year later, another explosion happened, boom, at 8:40 p.m. And as per the previous incident, no one was injured. But this time, the blast originated from a drain near a power substation at the back of Faber House. But this time, investigators did not find evidence of any explosive substance. But there was a hole measuring around 30 cm wide and 30 cm deep behind the building. But there was no damage done to the building. Instead, the school next door, the Singapore Chinese Girls' School, had borne the brunt of the impact. The school, which was located on a slope about 15 meters behind Faber House. So this explosion caused fresh cracks to appear in the school walls and shattered some of the glass window panels. During this time, both the Israeli embassy and the Canadian High Commission were still tenants of Faber House. And as per the previous explosion, it was suspected to be the work of terrorists who was targeting the Israeli embassy. Okay, that's about it. Alright, see you next time for the next adventure. Like, share and subscribe, and join me for my next adventure. I also have PayPal and Patreon to support me on that. Or even then, just watch some of my old videos. Until next time, bye bye.